Shalom, Lila Tov. I like to begin first off by thanking God for putting me in this place. You know, with NETIV's help and this airtime, I feel like I can share my thoughts with more people. Although sometimes I'm not sure what my thoughts are worth, but there's more places to listen on NETIV than and more good content. So I hope you take advantage of it. I want to also tell you that we just began a new month. And that new month, I think, is going to play into what's going on in Israel and what's going on in the United States. And so I'm going to spend a little time talking about that. The month is called Heshvan. And so we are now in Heshvan, which is the 8th month on a religious calendar, or it's the 2nd month of the governmental calendar. And so it all comes out of Exodus 14:2, when God changed the calendar for the people of Israel. Now, we are taught that Heshvan was reserved, since there are no holidays here, was reserved for when the Mashiach comes. And he will establish the third temple, and the third temple will be dedicated in this month. So we're now looking forward to what's coming on. This month deals with the idea of rectification, the idea of repair, the idea of moving towards God. And so lots of things are happening. I also want to remind you that two things already have happened in the past in the month of Heshvan. One, the flood. That's why it's called Mar Heshvan. It's the idea of a great flood. The second thing that happened in this month was the Tower of Babel and the confusion of languages. And what we're going through now is nothing more than an example of what happened then, which gives me an understanding that there's lots of things that we should understand from history. In fact, I remember my favorite, at that point in time, the first person I knew who was a B'nai Noach, and that was Vendell Jones, and he said, if nothing else, study history. Only he didn't quite put it in those words. He used a few four-letter words to express the need to do it quickly and often. Okay. Just as a reminder of where we're at in this whole thing, this is what, the 11th day of the fighting? Recent events have made it even more complicated. Vladimir Putin in Russia has spent some time trying to insert himself. He's willing to be the negotiator between Hamas and Israel. He sees that as being a role that he can fulfill. But he has this problem. You see, he called the siege, and he called it a siege, around Gaza as a Nazi invasion. It's tough to imagine that you're going to get somebody like that to negotiate your peace in a good, fair way. Also, the fact that at this particular point in time, he was pointing out the fact that some of the American arms that were bound for the Ukraine didn't make it to the Ukraine. They ended up on the black market, and they're now in the hands of Hamas. Well, that's part of it. We also know that Iran has supplied parts to Hamas. And just recently, I was told that North Korea has sent missiles and other things to Hamas. So Hamas has established itself with quite a few weapons, which is why you've seen over 7,000 rockets that have left the Gaza area for Israel. And those rockets now are going as far north as Tel Aviv. And actually, they're going farther. They're going past Tel Aviv. They're going all the way to Jerusalem. Nothing in Israel is safe anymore. There is no land that does not receive at least some emails from Hezbollah or Hamas. Now, there's also something else that's going on. We know that Israel is at war with Gaza, but they're also now fighting a second war against the Hezbollah in Lebanon. But there's also a third party that's involved, and that's the nation of Syria. Syria is technically not fighting, but they're receiving the arms, and then the arms are being shipped to the two places. In fact, a shipment was just intercepted just off the coast of Gaza. But anyway, in order to slow down that, Syria its two major airports. The first one's at Damascus, and the second one's in the northern part of the country called Aleppo. Aleppo is the place where they used to gas, where King Hussein gassed his own people. We can also understand that there's something else going on. This week, we've seen Anthony Blinken, our Secretary of State, has been over in Israel, and he affirms the fact that we are going to stand by them. He made one statement which caused another nation to get involved. You see, he made the statement, I am a Jew. I am just like you. Well, Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, heard that. And he immediately responded by telling the world, I am a Muslim and I will support the Muslims. In fact, I'm sending my Navy down there to go on maneuvers. So the Turkish Navy will be down in the area between Cyprus and Gaza, and they will be holding their war maneuvers at that point in time. The thing that we should understand is, and what he may try to make clear, was the fact that they're going to be using live ammunition for this little war exercise they're putting on, and they're asking the two carrier groups from the United States to get the heck out of there. So we may have some problems at sea. Oh, by the way, did you know that Turkey is Togarma in the scriptures? Yeah. Do you now understand? Let's see. I've given you Lebanon. I've given you Gaza. I've given you Russia. I've given you now Iran. I've given you now Turkey. Can you see Ezekiel 38 and 39 are coming into the view? And if things are not carried out in a right way, we can find ourselves in the battles of Gog and Magog at this particular point in time. Also, Israel is still poised on the border. And the thing that I find interesting in this whole thing is the fact that these war games that are going on and all that's happening is basically bringing us to the point of having to reflect. Now, those who are believers in God and have studied their scriptures understand that we're moving towards what Ezekiel was talking about. But most of the world isn't even considering that. They're just considering what's going on, and are trying to make sense out of it, where we already have some concepts or some ideas. I want you to turn with me. I studied last Sunday with a group, Jeremiah. Can you turn to Jeremiah chapter 6 for a second? Let me give you some. I made the lesson in Jeremiah chapter 6, the part 2 of this lesson was based on my reflections of how I saw in Jeremiah 6 the United States, and the United States through the Jewish word. If you look at verse 4 in Jeremiah chapter 6, it begins by saying, devote yourselves to war against Zion. Devote yourself. Can you see what's happening across the world? Can you imagine all of the people who are angry with Zion right now? It says, devote yourselves to that war. Arise, let us attack at noon. Well, they actually attacked in the morning, but that's okay. Woe to us as the day draws to a close, for the shadows in the late afternoon grow longer. Woe to them, because the fact that the Israelis are not limited by daylight. They have made more bombings in the evening than they have during the day. But turn over to verse 10. He goes on to say, to whom shall I speak and warn? They that will take heed? Behold, their ear is blocked, and they are unable to listen. Behold, the word of Hashem has become an object of ridicule to them. How is the world changed? Where is God? He's a subject of ridicule. He's the subject of what's going on. They have no desire for it, no desire at all. And I am filled with the prophecies of the wrath of Hashem. The whole Bible is filled with those promises and those prophecies. Can we see what's coming on? Then I want you to look down further, and I want you to look to verse 18 for a second. Now, obviously, this is not my whole Sunday morning talk, but it gives you an idea. Therefore, hear, O nations, know, O congregation, the evil that is in them. Them are the Gentiles. Them is the world. The evil that is in the world today. Can you imagine? Listen, O land, behold, I am bringing evil upon this nation and the fruits of their schemes, for they did not hearken to my words or my teaching. In fact, they rejected it. Can you hear the frustration in God and Jeremiah's voices? This is what's going on today in the world. We have to understand everything that's happening. Now, Daniel 7 was the point of discussion here at this moment. And I was starting to talk about, again, I've been 5 or 6 weeks now talking about Daniel 7. So I hope you find it interesting where we're going. But I want to go back again to that first verse, just to remind us. It says in the beginning, for it's the first year of Belshazzar's reign, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his head upon his bed. And he wrote the dream. Notice he forgot to write down the visions. This is just the dream that we're looking at. So he wrote the dream, and he told not the whole dream, but he told the major parts, meaning that we're going to have to live with less than a full answer. And so that's what makes it hard when you're really going through it, because Daniel actually knew the beginning from the end. He and Jacob were the only two that were mentioned in the scriptures having known how this whole thing will work out. Now, we can conjecture, and I have some ideas on how it's going to work out, but I wanted us to understand this is what he knows. Now, I want to today talk a little bit about the United States, because you see, the United States is where we live. And to give us a little bit of an understanding, or to give me a chance to express a little bit about what I understand is happening here in the United States. And so I want you to look again at verse number 4, at the first beast. It says, the first was like. He wasn't, but he was like a lion. And it had eagle's wings. And I was watching as its wings were plucked. Now, after the wings are plucked, notice what happens. And it was removed from the earth and stood upon 2 feet like a man. Well, what stood on 2 feet? That was the lion. The lion stood on 2 feet. Now, remember, the lion is the most ferocious of the animals, as we normally think. But what happens when you move a lion from 4 feet to 2 feet? You change its character and its nature. What they're really talking about, or what I think they're really talking about, is a socialist man, one who sees the world in a peaceful way coming in his direction. I have the answers. Now, it was given a human heart, not a lion's heart. So this beast has changed, but I want to go back to the eagle's wings. I don't know how many of you understand the Revolutionary War, but in the Revolutionary War, we had to pay for it, or somebody did. And there was a man named Haym Salomon. Haym Salomon was very, very wealthy. In fact, he has very little credit in the entire Revolutionary War. He organized the very first unit of Jewish soldiers who marched with George Washington. He supplied the arms all the way through that war. He ended up broke when it was all over. But he did so because he believed Daniel chapter 1 was, or chapter 7 here in verse 4, was dealing with our nation. Our nation, he said, was the eagle. Now, when it came time for us to create a constitution, Haym Salomon, well, at that point in time, was on in years, but at the same point in time, his mind was still sharp. And so Haym, as they're discussing America, the United States, they had to come up with a animal symbol for the United States. Ben Franklin offered the idea we should be a beaver. I don't think that's what you and I would have normally thought would have been appropriate, except the fact beavers were very common, and we were in the fur trading business back then. No, Heim insisted that we use the eagle. In fact, many of the things that he insisted upon ended up on the dollar bill. But I want to go even further beyond that. I want you to understand that as we're looking at this creature that's called the lion, or called the eagle, notice the eagle is separated from the lion. And because it was separated, look at how the United States differed from Europe. The United States was about religious freedoms. 11 of the 13 colonies were religious colonies coming from various parts of Europe. 2 of them were business communities. But the understanding was that the United States was a place for religious freedom, which was far different from what you would go to in Europe. England was under the Anglicans, and much of Europe was under the Pope. So it was a very different society, which went in a very different direction altogether. Religion was a very important part of our growth as a nation. In fact, I would say it was the most important part, especially by the time we have the Second World War. You see, the commitment of our United States to God and country was great. In fact, we call that generation the greatest generation that ever was. But on the opposite side of that, we find ourselves now in a generation that doesn't look like the greatest generation. What went wrong? Well, I want to go back to the year 1930, and I want to go back to Europe, and I want to go to Germany. You see, in Germany in 1930, there was a civil war of sorts, as Germany had been floundering since World War I, having all their assets taken away, and the country was melting down. There was nothing going on in the country at all. Everything itself seemed to be scattered. And so as we're going through it, there were 2 parties that were vying for control of Germany at that point in time. The one party was easy to identify. It was the Communist Party. The Communist Party was led by the universities, the colleges, the deans, the professors, those who were intelligent. You see, they were the ones that wanted to give us direction, or give Germany direction, I should say. But there was another group. It was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. In German, for short, the word is Nazi. They created, with the help of Adolf Hitler, the winning party. Now, as Hitler began to take control of Germany, the professors themselves understood that their time was limited if they remained. And so many of them fled to, guess where? The United States, here. They soon occupied seats of prominence in our major institutions over here. So guess what's going on in the United States in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s? It's the idea that we now become a nation that is more socialistic, more communistic. It's for the good of the people. That's the way we understand it. Now, the side effects of that didn't really show up, although they were noticeable, until about the time of the COVID. Because you see, in the time of the COVID, what happened? Churches were shut down. Religion became a second thought. If it wasn't for the internet, and if it wasn't for people like Zoom or whatever have you, many people would never have had any religious experiences at all. Now, if you wanted to go to the bar, that was an entirely different story, because the bars were open. That's where people could gather. Now, they were supposed to wear masks, but if you've ever watched the videos from back then, they weren't wearing masks, but they were drinking a lot of beer. And so I guess that was a time to be happy. Now, at the same point in time, we find that there were other things going on. Just prior to that, had the problem with the fact of the IRS. You see, the IRS was denying tax deferred groups who had a Christian bent. They couldn't get anything. At the same time, the opposite side was getting everything. We began to see injustice and an inequality. But it wasn't until after that, after COVID, that we began to see something new. The school boards in Virginia, the fight over whether or not certain books should be in the. We also had the fight over, if you will remember, the fight that lasted, well, it's still going on. Abortion now became legal in states' rights, not in the national rights. We also began to see that Mr. Trump, former President Trump, was still the big talk, even during the Biden administration. And MAGA and Mr. Trump and all of the others became, well, the bag of deplorables, I guess, as it was said. Times had changed. Political civil war was going on in the United States. And today, we would find, if we were to look around, the United States looks a much, much more like Europe than it ever did before. Now, I want you to turn with me to the book of Genesis, and I want you to go to chapter 36. Now, I'm not going to take a long time in this because I could very well spend an hour and a half just doing Genesis chapter 36. This is the chapter that deals with the relatives of Esau. Chapter 36 in the book of Genesis. Yes, that's it. And I want you to look to verse number 31. Okay? When we think about what's going on in this world, we have to think not in physical terms, but in metaphors and spiritual concepts. In verse 31, it begins, "Now these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom long before the king reigned over the children of Israel." First one is the king, son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and name of his city was Dinhabah. Understand, there was no city of Dinhabah in Edom. There is in Africa. And if you look at our beginning, Bela, son of Beor, you're looking at Balaam's father. You see, what we're going to read are names. The names have significance, but not as we had normally thought. You see, the Edomites were no different than any others. If you looked at the Edomites, you would find out that they broke up into clans. Amalek was one of those clans of Edom. And in doing so, we began to see different things. Let me go back and let's read some more. Now, Bela died, and Jobab, son of Zerah, from Basra, reigned after him. And Jobab died, and Husham, in the land of the Temanites, reigned after him. And Husham died, and Hadad, the son of Bedad, who defeated the Midianites in the field of Moab, reigned after him. And the name of the city was Avit. And Ahad died, and Samal of Maskarah reigned after him. And Samal died, and Saul of Rehoboth Naar reigned after him. And Saul died, and Baal Hanan, son of Achor, reigned after him. Notice there's no line of succession. These are individuals that are listed here. There must be a connection, but the question is, what connects all of these? Well, anyway, Baal Hanan, son of Achor, died, and Hadar reigned after him, and the name of his city was Pau. Notice, and he had a wife. You never heard the name of a wife on the others. This is the first time you hear of a marriage. Well, he had a wife and a daughter named Matred, daughter of Mizhab. Now, these are the names of the chiefs of Esau by their family. Time out. Who never died? So we're talking about 8 kings, 7 died, 1 survived. Now, you have to go not to sources that you would normally go to. You're looking at a Kabbalistic understanding. You see, the Edomites did not have kings until the time as the king of Israel. So there was something else that we need to see. And so we're going to put it into a metaphor. We're going to put it into something else. But to do that, I want to give you one more piece of information. We know in Genesis chapter 50, we know that Esau and his troops gathered at the cave at Machpelah. And there they waited for the body of Jacob and his 12 sons to arrive. You see, that they were going to make sure that Jacob couldn't be buried there. Well, obviously they were wrong. Jacob was buried there. In fact, Esau died there. Do you remember what happened to Esau? His head was cut off. Do you remember what happened to the head? It rolled into the cave. Now, according to the Midrashic writings, the sons didn't take the head out of the cave to give back to the Edomites, but they put it in the lap of Isaac. You remember Isaac loved Esau. And so his head stayed there. Now I want to bring another metaphor in. I want us to go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But do you remember what he did on day 6? He created man. And he created him in his own image. Well, time out. What image does God have? God is no physical features. So when he talks about us being in the image of him, it can't be a physical image. What has it to be? It has to be our mind and our attributes. Now, in Hebrew, that talks about what's called the 10 Sephiroth. The intellect is found from the head on up. It begins with Keter, which is the ultimate. Then we got Binah, and we got Hakma, so we got understanding and wisdom. And we also have knowledge. All that's in the head. But then after that, we have what we call the emotions. The emotions are kindness and restriction and balancing of our emotions, tefret. And then we have what we call behavior, which is Netzach and Hod and Yesod and Malkut. Wait a second. 3 up here leaves us 7. What was left was the 7 kings. You see, the 7 kings represent the emotions, which was what drives Hamas today, is their emotions. What also drives them is their behavior, because we now watch these emotions spill out. And we're watching these emotions spill out not only in Gaza, but we're watching them spill out all over the world. How many places can you go that you can actually see the great demonstrations over the fact that the hospital was blown up? And yet at the same time, everybody knows that the hospital blew up, including the latest transcripts out of Gaza. They intercepted a message indicating that the Gazans even know that it wasn't Israel that bombed the hospital, but it was one of their own missiles that actually misfired and dropped right on top of it and blew the entire building apart. Emotions and behaviors, they all had to die. Just like our emotions and our behaviors have to die. We have to regenerate ourselves. Now, the last king had a wife. Now, if you knew Kabbalah on the limited scale, you understand that a wife is the left side of a body. And on the left side of our head is Binah, understanding. So what never died was understanding. Now, understanding requires people to think and to know. How did we begin tonight? We began by talking about what Vendell Jones said, know history. Understand where everything is coming from. And in doing so, what you begin to understand is that this story is about us and this world. Our behaviors and our emotions have to change in order for this world to be transformed into the world to come. Now, in order for that to happen, God has had a plan all along. You and I are still a part of that plan. You see, we are about rectifying ourselves, making ourselves ready for the world to come. But at the same point in time, we are also making the world better by being here. That's what's going on here. Now, the closer we come to this understanding, the more we have to realize that certainly we're going to have to prepare for the bad days, because you see in the Kabbalah, the understanding is that these 7 represent all of the major disasters that are going to happen in this world. The storms, the earthquakes, all of that is coming to a head. Now, if you watch the Weather Channel, you know that they're very worried about global warming and climate change. I can tell you that what's happening today has not got anything to do with global warming and climate change, but it does have everything to do with preparing the world for the world to come. And so the world is changing. You and I also need to change. We need to find ourselves drawing closer to God. You see, in the United States and in the rest of the world, if we don't find ourselves drawing closer to God, we can find ourselves on the wrong end of this stick, and we can find ourselves back in the world. It's important for us to learn to pray, to read, to study, even to meditate. You know, in the book of Ezekiel, that first chapter is a story of a meditation. It's not about spaceships. It's not about chariots to God. It's about Ezekiel meditating and reaching up to God and moving through the heavens as he grows in his spiritual understanding. You and I need to grow. We always knew that. Some days it's harder to grow. You get tired, but we need to grow and to move forward. And when we do, it's called Ma'aseh Merkava. That's the idea of the building of the chariot. That's where we're at. Now, those 7 kings that died, remember, only the body dies, not the soul. And so the bodies of those kings, those 7 parts, died. But they will begin to align with what God has in mind. And everything will be moving towards God, because God has this idea in mind. And I told you I'd come back to Heshvan, and I want to take a couple minutes to do that. And I know I'm running along, but I feel like I need to give you some more information. The month of Heshvan, I've already told you, is about the idea of the only festival left will be the third temple. But today, if you were reading your horoscope, you would know that we're in the month of Scorpio. Scorpio, the scorpion. The scorpion is probably considered the most dangerous of the animals. In fact, down here where I'm at, if you have a little scorpion sting you, it's a lot worse than having the old man do it, because they don't know how to control their venom. It's also understood that their venom isn't hot. Their venom is cold. The idea of coldness in dealing with sin, indifference, that's what it amounts to. Oh, by the way, the word for scorpion is a krav. A krav. Well, there's another word very, very similar. Take out the resh, which is evil, rosh, and you have the word akev, which is heel. Now, in the book of Genesis, the 3rd chapter, the 15th verse, it talks about the fact that the serpent will bite at the heel of a character, but the heel will crush the snake or the serpent. Oh, by the way, There's another set of gematria that can go with this. First off, the serpent it has the same value as the word Mashiach. The word for a scorpion, a krav, has the same value as the word Mashiach David. This month should make us begin to think about seeing the Messiah, the son of David. We know in every generation, there is a Messiah. There is an anointed one. Many people have already said that the Messiah that will be here for this David has already entered this world, and he's living among us. We don't see him yet. In fact, somebody was saying it in one of the Jewish rabbis that he's actually walked through the city of Jerusalem this year. Now, how they know that, I have no idea. Has to be done through some gematria or something else. But as I look at this, we have to understand that this is a significant month. No festivals, no holidays. It's up to us to build up our understanding spiritually and to grow spiritually, to pray, to give, to study. That's all I have for tonight. Hopefully I gave you a couple things to think about. Anybody have anything they'd like to share?